Welcome back, Practice Underwater. This is your host, Matt, with George. George, how are we doing today?
I'm excited. This is part two of our episode with my buddy Donald. So if you haven't listened to part one, definitely do it. This is not one to rely on the recap at the beginning of the episode. Like, go back and listen to part one. This is a good. Matt kills this one. I'm so proud of him. He really did great.
Stop it, George. Stop. Just kidding. Thank you
As
for
he's
that.
motioning me to keep going.
Yes, of course. All right. Well, let's get into it. I know what everyone's here for, so let's get to part two of our interview with Dr. Donald. All righty. We are back with our fake Doc Donald. This is George. Nope, just kidding. This is Matt. That sounded like him, though, didn't it? Alrighty. So, just to give everyone a recap, Donald here graduated in 2018. He associated for about 8 or 9 months. He bought a practice from a seller. The practice was doing about $650,000. Seller stayed on for 3 weeks, rode off into the sunset, probably on a golf course somewhere. Donald here has increased production just about $15,000 a month in his first 6 months of ownership. We talked a lot about last time of some patient flow issues he's having, the need for external and internal growth, and we'll get to that with the numbers that point to that. Talked a little bit about increasing his case acceptance, converting new patients, and training his staff. So Donald, welcome back.
Hi.
So we have his November numbers up here, so we'll give those a look. So you're a new PBN user, right? Within this past month?
I am, yes. About 3 or 4 weeks in.
How has your experience been so far with it?
Well, it's kind of a love-hate kind of thing. You love it because it shows you basically everything you could ever want to or not want to see about, your dental practice analytics and all that kind of stuff. And you hate it because it shows you everything you could want to or not want to see about your dental practice analytics. So,
yeah, it's something that, like, I don't know, sometimes like I'm not in the mood to look at my own office, but when I do, I'm reminded of how the value just in having it. It's also easy to like take things personally that aren't going well, like numbers that aren't going well. How do you kind of combat that?
Yeah, so I should say that I did actually have access to Practice by Numbers in my associateship. The corporate chain that I worked for used it for all of their offices, and so I could use it to look at how my numbers compared to all the other producers in the chain and all that stuff. So I do have some experience with it. What I've kind of seen as an owner is that my perspective has changed dramatically because as an associate, I wasn't really looking at hygiene, didn't care about that. I looked somewhat at treatment acceptance, case acceptance, all that kind of stuff. But as an owner, I'm really looking at how many inactive patients we're getting every single month, or how the production that we've had or the treatment planning we've had in the prior month translates to how much dentistry I get done in the next month, that kind of thing. And so it's one of those things where, because my perspective has changed, the software is just kind of totally different for me.
Since patient flow is your big ticket item, let's start there. So as I mentioned last episode, the number I'm looking at for our Dr. Donald here is his recall current percentage. How much of his patients are active on their recall? He's got currently 62% are active. Like I said last time, we want to see it at about 70%. So just having that number, I'm able to know that he needs to do things to reactivate these patients to get him in. Also talked about his new patient flow being low. Last month, he saw 9 new patients, and 6 of them left without pre-appointing. These are all numbers and values you wouldn't get from a report from Dendrix. You just can't see this level of detail. And in this way, it really drives, how you run your office and the decisions and changes you make. So those are the big numbers I'm looking at there. Donald, for you, what stands out in your November numbers, either in that realm or another area?
Certainly, new patient flow was low in November. It was a month where I didn't really feel like we were really like energized. It didn't feel like I could just tell that it wasn't going to be a very high quality month production wise and all that kind of stuff. I think those new patients, I'm looking at them now and trying to go back through mentally how they got here, and all but one of them, no, sorry, two of the nine, two of the nine were internal referrals, and then 7 of the 9 were mailers. And so it's nice that I can actually just look here and see, how much money we made from those, say, 7 mailer patients, as compared to the considerable more amount of money that I spent on those mailers and that kind of thing. It's humbling.
Yeah, and it's a small sample size, obviously, but it does speak to the level, like the type of patient you're getting from those mailers, not being as strong as an internal referral, which is very natural.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also eye-opening when you look at that same tab, you're seeing the number who are going inactive. So last month, you had 12 go inactive and you got 9 new patients, but really you only got 3 new patients because 6 of them didn't schedule back. So you net lost 9 patients last month. And going back through your other months, that's actually a little on the lower side of what you have in a normal month. Normal month, you're losing net probably 10 to 15. So that's kind of what I was pointing to, is that this practice inpatient base is steadily declining. So that's why, the need for, like we said last time, the growth, internal and external, from that. What else jumps out to you?
It's pretty clear that we're not converting, even the new patients that do schedule, we're not really converting a ton of treatment from them. As I mentioned, basically all of our treatment comes out of hygiene, which is, with a negative net patient flow, is a non-sustainable form of dentistry. Looking at the patients going inactive and all that stuff, I skim through them and look at their names, and some of them I'm like, I've seen members of their family and things like that, and so it triggers in my head, like, why do we have some people going inactive in their family and others not, and that kind of thing. And so some of those patients seem like patients that it might be really easy for us to reactivate and get back in chairs and that kind of thing. The numbers in November were not what I want, obviously, but it was a month where I didn't really feel busy, and that's totally reflected in the numbers. The amount of stuff that I was doing per patient wasn't really that high, and so, which kind of is to be expected when all of your cases are patients that have already had years worth of dentistry done. There's not. There's not a ton of meat left on the bone and that kind of thing. I guess that's what jumps out at me.
Yeah, so that's an observation I have in my own practice. My seller is pretty aggressive with his diagnosing. So I am seeing a lot of my recall are patients that have had a lot of dentistry done, and there's not a ton to pull from it, necessitating the need for a higher new patient flow.
Right.
One other thing in the new patient flow I wanted to recommend is to start inputting where they came from on PBN. So in that flow chart or that pie chart where it says 9 new patients seen, all of them are unknown, like putting when they're entered into your software came from mailers. So that'll show up here. So you can look at and really, without having to like remember these people, can see if your marketing's working and which one is and which one isn't.
Yeah.
And one thing with the family members, whenever I see a recall, I always, aside from, like we said, necessitating calling patients who are overdue, if I always look at their family and I see if their family is on target for recall. If it's not, my hygienist and me will bug them to say, hey, it's usually the husband. It's almost always the husband who is like falling through the cracks. We always bug them to get their family members in any chance we can.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, because it's hearing it from their wife who's badgering them is going to be a lot stronger than the office calling them. Easy to ignore us.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's pivot into your diagnosis because I had a couple observations there. So with the diagnosis and treatment plan tab, I like to look at how well you're doing case acceptance in the different procedures. So for crowns, for example, we like to see at least 50%. You were right around there. Fillings would like to see a little higher, like 70%. Again, you're right around there. What's jumped out at me, and I look back on other months, and it was the same deal, is the implant stuff. So you're diagnosing steadily 20 to 30,000 in implants a month, but your case acceptance on those is very small. So what do you think's going on there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's some amount of that is like a decent number. I would say, I don't really know what the exact numbers are, but a decent number of the implants that we treatment plan are not edentulous sites, right? There's teeth that need to be extracted, grafted, wait 4 months, and then implanted, that kind of thing. And so, because I've made that observation before and seen that we had like $100,000 in implants treatment planned, but we only did like 10 or something like that. But then when I go back and look through the actual patients, it's like, well, we took that tooth out 2 months ago, and so the implant doesn't show up as being done, even though it's in the treatment plan or it's been accepted, or that kind of thing. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that we don't really have I don't think we have a solid kind of financing program. And so like the patients that I see are very much not used to spending, $3,000 in a year at the dentist. The seller was very conservative, and people liked him because he was conservative. And so, we have some cases where I'll treatment plan like 4 implants in a person. And, when they see the price tag for that, naturally they bulk and that kind of thing. And so we don't have a very good comprehensive approach to offering financing or trying to make it affordable for them. And so, it's not something that comes easily for us or for them.
Yeah. On your first point, if you talk to Dan from Practice by Numbers, there's a way to input the implant treatment in your software where it doesn't show up like that. Like you said, you're taking out a tooth, you plan the implant, but then it's not really like you didn't convert that. It's like it's in the future. So there is a way to do it. Other way you could do it, which is probably less ideal, is just to not put the implant in there until they come back for the bone graft check, and then you put it. That's how I do it at my office, but I know there is a way in the software to like how you're inputting it that it won't show up like that. So I would check into that just to give you a more accurate reading of how you're selling these things. Are you using any financing for these patients?
Nothing really beyond like care credit, and then for some, select patients that have like really good history with the practice, we'll offer like in office financing for like up to a year, something like that.
Yeah, definitely something to explore more for these these higher cost cases, especially like you said when they're not used to paying $3,000 out of pocket.
Before we get back to the episode, I wanted to take a minute and thank Practice by Numbers. Without their help in allowing us to set up the shared practices dashboard, a lot of what we do on Practice Underwater wouldn't be possible. I want to take a minute and highlight a clip from the episode that we did with Rohit, where we highlighted some of the metrics that really matter most.
One of my pet peeves that I want to share is that when you talk to some of the providers that are really successful out there, that have been in practice for 20, 30 years, and they roll your eyes when you say you're going to manage by numbers and this and that. They have successful practices, they have built them, and they have something right they have done. And when they tell you the only thing you need to look at is your bank account, it's absolutely incorrect. Okay? It pisses me off every time I look at that and I see that comment on the Facebook group, because success is not happenstance. It just doesn't happen.
It's kind of baffling. It's an everyday kind of thing where you're striving to improve, you're striving to tighten your systems, you're striving to know your practice better, and just to get in that kind of complacent mode is easy. I can see how it happens, because you're so in the wheel and you get overwhelmed with things that this isn't something you want to think about a lot of times. But it really is so important that people focus on this kind of thing.
I hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you guys are interested in trying out Practice by Numbers and looking at your practice through the Shared Practices dashboard, and there are many other dashboards, you can go to practicebynumbers.com and set up a free trial.
Other things with the diagnosis. So like we talked about before, the honeymoon phase. So you're like in November, you diagnosed on 70% of the people, extremely high. That's obviously a number that will probably decrease as you go forward. How has it been as far as like, aside from the implant stuff, these people accepting your treatment?
I feel like it's been pretty good for the most part. Our case acceptance is pretty high. I feel like if you took the implant, like if I didn't do implants, our treatment acceptance numbers would be pretty great. But I do. So, I think a lot of our patients have intrinsic trust of healthcare providers and of dentists, and they trust the seller. And the seller chose me, and so of course they should trust me, whether or not that's true. And so that's helped us a lot in that respect. And so we haven't felt a ton of resistance in terms of case acceptance. But I also know that most of the time during an exam, I know that I fall short of truly diagnosing everything that I see on these patients. And so I know that, I've already had patients where I'm on my second pass through and I'm like, how did I miss this, this, and this? Or why didn't I say something about that back then, that kind of thing. And same thing, like I was talking about perio, like, probably half of my adult population over 50 has Lyme disease, and it's just something that's gone unaddressed in my office until the last couple of weeks or so. So, but case acceptance, I feel like has been pretty good.
Yeah, it definitely has. And like I said, with the crowns fillings, you're right, kind of in that good range where you want to see docs. So you touched on a little. So let's pivot to hygiene. So you got the two full-time hygienists going. My main observations from them is they're definitely on the lower side as far as their hourly production and their daily production. Mm-hmm. Do you attribute that to holes in the schedule, or what do you kind of see as the cause for that?
It's I think it's a little bit of everything. Okay, for the first 5 months or so of owning this office, really, first 4.5 months, we didn't really, unless the patients looked like their teeth were going to fall out, we didn't talk about perio at all. And I know that perio is a really good way for hygiene to increase their hourly production, all that kind of stuff. And so it's really, I think if I look at our perio percentage, in June, it was probably like 2% or something like that, as opposed to November, where, it's still not the 30% that it should be, something like that, but it's still pretty low. There are holes in the schedule, and, part of that has been in this first 6 months as I'm trying to meet everybody in the practice, and we're trying to figure out, is this person going to stay? Is this person going to go? That's contributed to us having more holes than we usually do. We've also touching on that kind of being understaffed in the front thing. It's like our front desk person doesn't really have time to call what I would feel like is far enough in advance to make sure that these people are coming to their appointments. And if we find out they're not coming, that she's called with enough advance time to fill those holes. If she's calling 2 days before an appointment, that's not really enough time for us to consistently fill all the holes that we've had. And then the last thing is, now that we've actually implemented a better perio program, it's actually led to a lot of appointments where all we do is an exam and x-rays, because we have to spend so much time diagnosing and treating and planning perio. Like if you have an hour-long appointment scheduled, you're not going to get to 2 quads of SRP in an appointment where you were planning on doing a prophy exam and x-rays, that kind of thing. So that's also kind of contributed to it.
Right. So they're coming back for the cleaning. They haven't seen you yet, and now they're being told they have perio. So you just do the x-rays, the cleaning, and the exam, and then come back?
Yeah, so typically what we'll do is an x-ray, the exams, and if they're not all 4 quads of perio, then we'll do the prophy on the non-perio teeth. Typically, that's how it goes on an ideal day. But if the patient has perio in addition to other treatment that needs to be done, typically we just run out of time to discuss all of that stuff and try to get something accomplished.
Yeah. So what have you done as far as training your hygienist on offering more perio?
Yeah. So thankfully, the hygienist that we hired to replace the long-term one that we had entered. She is 3 years out of school, and she worked in an office where she actually worked in basically the exact same scenario where the office had a huge older patient base that had undiagnosed hygiene. And so they actually they did inspired hygiene with Rachel Wall, I think. And so she was trained pretty heavily in that. And so she's helped me sort of implement a lot of basically a scripted way of talking to patients about perio and really kind of addressing gum infection, talking about it in a way that lays out the consequences of inaction, all that kind of stuff. And I think that our perio case acceptance has been way better than I expected it to be. I expected to get way more like 70-year-old men just walking out saying, well, I don't have gum disease, that kind of thing, or what's gum disease? And it's really, that hasn't been the case. We've had really good acceptance with that. And so that's gone well. That's been something I've been happy with.
So that's the hygienist with the higher perio percentage, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing what like proper education will do to these people. You think, like you said, they've never heard it before. They're going to just shrug their shoulders and walk out. But clearly she is educating well and they're, realizing the problem. How about the other hygienist? Her percentage is much lower.
She worked in this office where they did no perio for a year. And so she was trained to ignore it entirely, and so we've had to sort of recalibrate her so that she can understand that, yes, you're now allowed to talk to your patients about the disease that you've known has been there the whole time and all that kind of stuff. And it's a slower process because she's just not used to doing it. She's more accustomed to, being told to sweep it under the rug or just not to engage with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a testament to when you're trying to make big changes in office like you are, it's going to require a lot of staff training, especially when you get people who have worked other places. They have their own mindsets. They've been doing it a while, and they're not as apt to change in a lot of times. So like really committing to training those people and like going through the growing pains with them is really the only way you're going to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are in the growing pain stage.
Isn't that first year ownership fun?
Yeah, it's like living the dream.
Yeah, I don't miss it. There's like for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's like in that 6 to 9 month stage, which you're about to get into, it's like some light bulbs start to go on and it like starts to get easier. And then you get closer to that year and then it gets like, all right, now we're like rolling a little bit and it gets, so you've gone through a lot of them. So I don't think there's too many left.
Well, good.
So I see some,
I'll take your word.
I see some light at the end of the tunnel for you.
We'll circle back in 6 months, see how it goes.
Sure. One thing also that stuck out to me, and I think this is probably mainly due to you not having the second assistant, is there's no same day treatment done. I'm a huge same day treatment guy, especially when it comes to fillings. Like if there's a single filling, I'm not bringing that person back. I'm going to do everything I can, get that done today. So when you get this new assistant on board, is this something you're going to start to implement?
Yes. And so, that's like, and to be frankly honest, it's not always because we don't ask. Like the patient base is so accustomed to just, okay, so I'll come back in 2 months and do that. And I'm like, well, no, you live an hour and a half away. Wouldn't you rather just do it right now? And sometimes they're just like, no, I'd rather come back and I'm going to go to the mall, when I come. And I'm like, okay. But that is absolutely something that has been one of the things that's held us back, because there are just so many appointments on my schedule that are like occlusal on number 30 that could have just been like 6 total minutes of my time, while the patient was here and all that kind of, and they were already in the chair, that for whatever reason doesn't end up that way. So that's something that I certainly want to be able to focus on.
I guess try to find the pain points for these people. Like for me, I always go to like, listen, you don't have to come back again. Like who wants to come back at the dentist? Kidding me?
Right.
I don't. Mm-hmm. If I'm impatient, I'm not coming back. Like if I can get it done now, I'm getting it done now. And like that has seemed to work. I feel like I get almost everyone will say yes unless they really have a conflict. So I would definitely keep at that. Especially because, as you said, and this may be more with recall, but you do have a small issue with people canceling and no showing. So again, this obviously takes care of that in that realm.
Exactly. Can't no show when you're already there, huh? That'd be pretty impressive.
So I got to point out some great things you're doing. Of course, can't just like rag on you this whole time. Hygiene pre appointment, amazing. Over 90, that's awesome.
Right.
I can't get mine above 90, so you're doing something that I certainly can't do. Um, what else? Your AR in check. Mine's starting to get out of control. So whatever you're doing, that front desk person is definitely doing well with that.
Yeah, she's awesome. Anna. Gets me all that money.
What else jumps out to you on the dashboard that we haven't covered?
We actually covered most of the things I really wanted to talk about because, the problems that we have are really just kind of like glaring. It's those things that like, well, if you're losing more patients than you're getting, then you're never really gonna, you're not really gonna have a good time with that, that kind of thing. And so, I'm really excited for our practice because the team that we have is a team that I know can do what I need them to do, and they've all been very much willing and happy to accept most of the changes that I've implemented. They're excited when I buy new technology, and they're really just kind of, they're just really they've helped a lot in this whole kind of whole process as a new owner, because before you're an owner, you don't know what it's like to own, and you can read whatever thread you want to read and talk to as many people as you want, but until the note is on your shoulders and the payroll is on your shoulders, you just don't really know. But my staff has really helped with that, especially my assistant. She's amazing. She's been in the industry longer than I've been alive, and she earns every dollar that I pay her, and I'm very grateful for that. But we also have a practice that has some issues that needs to improve, but they're not things that are insurmountable. They're not things that we can't accomplish. And so,
yeah, it's a great point you make, because like you came in so well prepared. Like the CE you took, the dental town, like you're very active, on all forums and everything. But like you said, it's still such a like you can't adequately 100% prepare yourself for what you go through. It's just you have to do it. So that's a very good kind of point you made.
Well, thank you, Matt.
You're welcome. So I want to end with some of the action items that you're taking from today, and kind of how you're going to move your office forward to get into that 84 a month you talked about.
Yeah. So, priority numero uno is butts and chairs. And so for us, that's reactivation, and that's new patient growth. Conceivably, reactivation is more of a low-hanging fruit because these patients already have experience here with us and all that kind of stuff. But for us, reactivation also means that we need help. We need more people. We need more time to do that. In terms of new patients and all that kind of thing, I know that I need for external growth, I need a more concentrated and more kind of, how do I put this? More intentional process with it. It's like, well, let's try this and let's try this. And that's not really working. That's not getting us to where we want to be. And so I need to be more intentional with that. And it's not something that's outside of my ability. It's just something that we haven't done. Internally, it's the same thing. We need to be more intentional. We need to have a system in place where every patient is asked every time, and is given a referral card, and it's told about the raffle, or told about whatever, and that kind of thing. Because we already have that with Google reviews. We've done a great job with that, and it's because we made it a process. We made it a process in the practice that we did every time on every patient, to the point of annoyance. And so we need to do that with the things that with everything that matters in our practice. And so that's including new patients and all that kind of stuff.
So that part-time front desk woman, would she be open to becoming full-time?
No, most likely not. She's very comfortable with her role as a part-timer. I mean, I'll certainly have a conversation with her because she, in the past, was full-time and dropped it. In fact, now that I think about it, she went part-time when I acquired the practice. That was like a thing that she asked if I was going to be comfortable with. And I was like, well, really, how much were you working when you were here before? She's like, well, I was here 8 hours, but I was probably working about 5, that kind of thing, which is, you might say, a red flag. But so we dropped her to part-time, and she's done a great job in the part-time that she's there. She's consistent and works and gets the work done. But I don't know that she is a 8-hour a day kind of person.
Yeah. So maybe looking to like a cheap part-time, fresh out of college, high school, anything that can just you use a phone and use software.
Yep.
Really much. It has a good personality. So I'd invite you to kind of like take this stuff back to Derek, specifically the patient flow issue, being like, this is our main focus. Like, this is what we need to. Like, you're diagnosing well, your case acceptance is good. You do all the specialty procedures. You have a lot of things going well. Rather than like focusing on making a strength a better strength, like diagnosing more, let's focus on what's really going to make this sustainable instead of just like an easy fix to take more money a month.
Right.
Because everything is made to be so complicated in owning a practice. It's really not. It's really like 6 things you got to do well. And like a big one is the patient flow.
Right.
Like I like focusing on big ticket things rather than like little stuff that's going to bog you down, So that would be my invitation to you to really like say, hey, let's make this a focus the next few months and let's get this figured out.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on, Donald. I want to give you all the congrats and gratitude in the world for getting into ownership so quickly. You have such a good head on your shoulders. You knew your issues before they were even out of my mouth. Dedication, your work ethic, your smarts, it all comes through. No question you're going to get there. Thank you for sharing your story on the show and being here with us.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Stuff you guys do is awesome, and I think everybody knows it.
Oh, that's nice to say. That was our part 2 of Interview with Donald. We'll see you guys next week. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that part 2 with Dr. Donald. I know I had a blast interviewing. He was such a cool guy. Like, I could totally be friends with this guest.
I am friends with this guest.
I know. I'm jealous, George. All right. Well, we've had a lot of talk on this show about being a thought leader, coming up with an idea that is revolutionary to your industry. George has now added to his list with one he's about to share with us right now. We touched on it a little in the episode. I would like to give credit at this point that is an idea I got from you, George. So take it away.
I'm happy. It's always important that we always acknowledge the original thought leader whenever appropriate. And if you don't understand the tongue-in-cheek of what we're doing right now, I made a comment on Facebook about something that I learned from somebody else, and I got a private message harping on the fact that I did not acknowledge somebody as the original thought leader behind the thing I was posting. So from now on Practice Underwater, we always acknowledge the original thought leader. And in this case, this time it's me. So I'm going to talk about sort of my experience in ownership. And, I had coaching, and, my first 6 months of ownership was co-diagnosis was in place. We were diagnosing a lot of stuff, doing a ton of doctor production, and my diagnosis percentage was high. My treatment plan size was high. My treatment acceptance was high. And I expanded in accordance with my increased demand. And everything with my coach is like, you're doing great, diagnosis looking good, everything was, and it was like 6 months in, like on the flip of a switch. It was December. I started in June, and it was like, whoa, what happened to my diagnosis? It just like dropped from a cliff, and I had no idea why. And so I spent like 2 months, like really investigating, like while my practice is declining, really investigating, like what the, like it felt so easy 6 months ago, and now it feels so hard, like 30% down. Like it was insane.
Wow.
And we were just so high. It was just like such an unsustainable level of production. And so we talk about sustainability, so then the next 6 to 9 months was really a diagnosis period of like, why is this happening? And then, months 9 through 15 were building sustainability. And now I'm sitting in December of the following year, and my numbers are better than that unsustainable December, but it's also projecting to be more sustained. Like we're actually growing in momentum. So it was, but that process was like a challenging year for me in my ownership of really like just really trying to figure out like what the happened, you know? And so when we coach people, we really do start with like almost all of our clients are new owners. Like, you know, it's a very heavy, like I think 80% of my clients are new owners when they sign up with us. And we very much like our very first call is like, okay, what are we going to do to grow now? You got to enjoy the 6-month honeymoon. We're not going to run away from it. We're going to ride the wave. But while we're riding the wave, we're going to build on the back end sustainability. So you're not in the situation I was in. You know, for me, it was a patient flow problem. Producing and collecting like a $2 million office with the new patient flow of like an $800,000 office. Like that's not sustainable. And so it wasn't until after the honeymoon that I figured out that that was the case. And so I think, you know, that was a tough lesson to learn. And I don't know why I've never heard of that before. Nobody's ever talked about it. Nobody's ever noticed it. I think I was, you know, maybe one of the first people to like go through early ownership with metrics as such a big part of my understanding of my practice. So I could really see what was happening and kind of correlate it to why. I don't know why that's never been addressed before, but it's a very, very real thing. And like all of our clients experience it pretty much.
I just have a theory. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but do you think that's because most people who buy a practice maybe don't experience that success right away in those first 6 months? Is that why it's not really like a standard thing?
I guess because maybe the increased diagnosis is offset by some other areas that are not. Maybe, you know, when you just have a peak performer walk into a practice, you see that more clearly. But I don't know. I mean, all of like a very high percentage of our clients experience it, you know, and, you know, now it's like on my coaching calls, we're like, yeah, we're in the honeymoon. We're trying to like work on this, you know, it's like, it's kind of become our language. But you know, so I think like, let's break down the timeline. Your first 3 months are like hell on earth as an owner. Like, I mean, for me, it's hell on earth because it's a lot of minutia, like calling a service to switch over to the billing. And like I hate that stuff with a passion.
Yeah, getting things set up is not easy or quick. It's annoying.
And so those first 3 months are like the practice is at a little bit of a drop of momentum because you just had a change in provider. And so like that you're building up your diagnosis for 3 months while you're doing all of this extra paperwork. And then like around the 3-month mark, pretty much everybody says, okay, I feel like I'm like out from under the water, to use the name of the show, but like you feel like you're out from under all of the like paperwork.
Yeah, you're not using working capital anymore. You finally got money coming in and like...
Yeah, it just takes 3 months to like kind of like feel comfortable. And it's around that same time that your diagnosis has caught up to your schedule. So now you're like, whoa, practice is like doing way more and I don't feel as stressed. And like, so the last 3 months of that honeymoon are really nice. And then once 6 months comes around, you don't have a drop in production yet, but you have a big drop in diagnosis. So month 7, you're seeing mouths for the second time. Maybe it takes a couple months because it took you a couple months to get comfortable diagnosing, but eventually you're going to get that decline. And that's where people start. That's when I started working on other parts of the practice, like hygiene or insurance maximization or, you know, scheduling or new patient flow. And, you know, I really wish I had worked on the patient flow earlier because that's the thing that takes the longest. So you want that patient flow to be built up to the point that when your diagnosis drops, you have that steady flow of diagnosis through a different avenue that's more sustainable, because it's very impossible to like repeat the thing of seeing 2,000 mouths for the first time again. Like that's just an unsustainable amount of new dentistry that you're going to find. Yeah. But the way to replicate that is through new patient flow. What were you going to say, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to harp on patient flow a lot. I got a feeling that's going to be like a big theme in this show going forward, because this is the one we're seeing neglected over and over and over again. Like people, they focus on their diagnosis, they focus on, you know, bringing in procedures, whatever. This is the one where it's, like you said, takes the longest. It's probably the hardest to figure out because it's not like an exact thing. You know, you invest this in marketing, you get this many more patients. You know, it's a lot of confusion around it. We weren't trained in it in school. Like we didn't learn these skills. We're just learning them on our own, however. So this is the one I feel like it's going to be like a big theme. Keep coming on patient flow.
You know, and I think if you really look at like shared practices coaching, like what do we do really well? Analytics. You know, that's what sets us apart. Our ability to really understand analytics. So as we coach more, we start learning more about what are the biggest issues. And so you might see even an evolution of practice underwater of like us harping on certain things. Like we probably have 10 different metrics that we use to track patient flow. You know, so we have a very good understanding of the different areas where patients are going and how, you know, where that issue lies. It's not like we're just looking at new patients, you know. Like in this example, in this practice, we looked at new patients, and we also looked at the low reappointment rate of those new patients. So we knew the low quality new patients. So now he has low new patients and low quality. So it's our ability to really understand like 10 different metrics around patient flow, where then we feel confident in our ability to solve the problem. And so in my practice, patient flow was the big problem. And it wasn't until I hired an extra front desk to fill all of our hygiene openings, and we started working on our marketing, and like then we started getting sustainability. But we were very unsustainable for that first 9 months, I would say.
So what's like a specific action or actions that you could have taken in those like month 3 to 6 or 2 to 6 that would have stopped?
Hiring an additional front desk way earlier. So that was an area that, different coaching philosophy versus what my practice had needed. And I didn't hire a front desk until month 9. And I really should have hired one in month 2, 3. Like that's really when I should have hired one. Because if I could have filled those hygiene openings earlier with a higher reappointment rate, then they would be like, we would have had the effects of that later. So using the unsustainable level of production that we had to pay for the higher staff costs to build sustainability in the practice, I would have preferred to do that at a time where we were cash rich versus when we're in a decline and then having to take on additional expense.
That's a really cool point, because like in that first year, you're going to have very low taxes because you're going to be writing off the practice purchase. You're going to be doing a lot of diagnosis because you're seeing the people for the first time. Usually it's a retiring doc, hasn't been diagnosing a lot. So your diagnosis is really high. You got those two things going for you. That's the time to invest in the practice.
I wish I had started marketing aggressively. I wish I had started getting my front desk in place for sustainability when I was cash rich, low taxes, 100%.
Yeah. And for me, like looking back on it, I prioritized paying loans. That's where my cash went. I didn't prioritize sustainability of the office, and it shows in my office. But my advice to anyone in the similar situation would be invest in that sustainability when you're cash rich, which is going to be in that first 6, probably from month 3 to month 9, say. Like you're going to be cash rich.
Yeah, and it sucks because it took me like 3 months of like seriously trying to explore my metrics to figure out what was happening. Because I had a lot of different factors. I couldn't see clearly what the issue was. And then once I got it, I felt like it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like April, May, something like that, where I was like, okay, like I'm almost on a year, and finally I figured it out. But it was like 4 or 5 really tough months of just trying to figure out what's going on, just not feeling right. Like that's the worst. When something's wrong, when it just doesn't feel right, it feels too hard. When you have things in place, it feels really easy. So,
well, unfortunately, this is the plight of a thought leader. So you have to go through the struggles so the rest of us can,
to earn the title of original thought leader. You have to. Yeah. And so, I guess, for me, like the marketing thing, like with the magazines, sure, I'm not the original thought leader on the idea, but yeah, I invested like 10 grand in my own magazine to get it to the point where we can now do it for like way cheaper. So yeah, I mean, I think in general, you typically, I don't mind bearing that cross. Like, I don't mind being the person that explores things and tinkers in my practice and suffers and loses a lot of money trying to figure stuff out for the betterment of our profession. Like, that doesn't bother me.
We all thank you for that. And I'm being serious.
Yeah. Like, that I very much go into my practice expecting to try things and fail and then retry and, kind of move on. So I did want to, before we close, I did want to make a point about Matt. I always like to acknowledge, it's hard to acknowledge your own special sauce. And so in part 1, we acknowledged Donald's special sauce. And I said in part 2, I'd acknowledge Matt's. And there was 3 things that he said that like super stuck out to me. And I know him well, so, it's easier for me to say this. But he talked about his ability to do single fillings same day, and he also talked about how he talks to patients about unscheduled family members. Like him personally will go tell a patient like, yo, where's your husband? Like, why isn't he coming in? And then he had mentioned case acceptance, like you guys don't know Matt, but like his case acceptance numbers are so incredibly high compared to like what we like to see. And like him and I have very different standards on that, but those are the 3 things that, and it's just like that level of, whatever those 3 have in common, just his ability to like sell and his ability to have uncomfortable conversations with people. Like, where is your husband? Like, that's such a weird thing to say to a patient, in my opinion. Like, but he just does it with ease. Or like, he's like, I almost 100% of the time get a patient to do a same day filling. Like, that's incredible. And that's Matt, so like people, like, I think in a future interview with a guy named Ace, he's kind of like hard on himself. He's like, well, I'm not like Matt. And I'm like, yeah, you're not like Matt. Like, Matt has some unique abilities, and don't feel bad if you can't do those things. I can't. I have my own unique abilities. And so it's important to recognize your unique abilities and really understand them and understand the areas where you're weak and need to improve. So I like what you said about not making an A an A plus. Like, Matt, a case acceptance for you is an A plus. Don't make it an A plus plus. Like, work on other things.
Thank you for that, George. Yeah, and it's like, it's like anything else. It's like you can't just like memorize the words to something, like memorize the right words to say to get someone to do a same day filling. It's your way of being. Like, that's the way it is. It's like, where are you coming from? Are you coming from a place of trust and connection, partnership, or are you just coming from an expert? I'm the doctor. I'm going to tell you what to do. That's if it's boiling the secret sauce down, it's my way of being, and that's something I've learned through my life coaching program. And George, you're working with a life coach, so it's something as well.
Yeah, and like, so what does that really mean, right? Like, let's go on a little bit of a tangent here. Like, so let's just say Matt tells, like, because I think what I heard a lot from Donald was like blaming current situations for not things. Like, patients aren't used to staying for same day. They're always used to scheduling that next appointment. Well, it's like, if Matt walked into that room and he said, like, let's do the filling same day, like, oh, no, schedule. Like, why? You're already here. Like, for him, he's going in from a place of like a being of like not being offended by the patient not doing that, like just exploring and in a partnership. Like, his presence is so like in such a way that encourages that conversation with the patient. Like, he'll ask that question without even thinking about it. It's just natural. And the patient can open, well, I don't want to get numb today. And it's like, well, you have to be numb next time. You might as well just be numb today. Like, he'll be able to navigate around that patient's concern in a way that gets him those high results. So it's more than just the right words. It's the way of the mindset in the moment. And that's what he does really well.
And I like to always tell clients, like, I want you guys to draw up their objections. Like, whatever their objection is, get it out of their mouth. So then you can deal with it. And then you can talk about it. And then you can move them forward, to get past it.
Yeah.
And that's comes from not just, so many people, they just stop right at the service. But do you want to do today? No, maybe next time. Okay. That's probably 90% of people. Stop.
Yeah. 95%.
You gotta go deeper. Continue to go in and find out what's going on.
And like, this is me talking about leadership. Like, that's what Matt does really well. Like, Matt does this extremely well. So, he's a huge asset to our team. And like, I like to highlight these because it's very easy to listen to the interview and hear Matt say like 100% of the time, my patients do same day fillings. And then like, you don't really get why. So I really wanted to highlight that.
Thank you for that, George. Anything else for this one?
No, I think Donald's episodes were great, and I hope you guys didn't mind the longer outro where we ranted a bit. I just enjoy talking, so thanks for listening.
I think they're learning to like our rants. I really do. I think it's playing well. As someone who's has no evidence for this, I'm just going to say
it. All right. Well, you guys let us know, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater. It's been a blast. Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we can look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.